Welcome fellow nerds, my name is Christian and today we're going to be going over the tips, tricks, and battle tactics for Star Wars Armada Wave 2 for the Empire. There are currently 5 Imperial Admirals, the most expensive of which is still Grand Moff Tarkin at 38 points, next is Darth Vader at 36 points, SCREED at 26 points, MOTTI at 24, and Admiral Ozzel at 20. Each Admiral has his own unique abilities and pairs well with certain ships and particularly certain battle tactics better than others. So for this reason, I like to usually choose my Admiral first and then think of a fleet around him. First we'll go over Tarkin. Tarkin has the interesting text ability to give every ship in your fleet a token at the beginning of every turn. Giving each ship in your fleet a token is particularly helpful. It can give you a lot more flexibility. If your Imperial Star Destroyers are about to fly off the map and you need to navigate, you can't wait 3 turns for that to happen. Go ahead and give that token out and you can slow down immediately. At 400 points, you're going to be able to include a good number of ships. Even the most beefy Imperial lists are probably going to have at minimum 2 ships. Probably going to have 3, maybe even 4 if you're going to be including the new Raider. So that way you get to give a lot of tokens out. If you are going to have Tarkin, try to have as many ships as you can, but probably 3 at a minimum. The next most expensive is Darth Vader. He's new with Wave 2 and he's at 36 points. He allows you to spend, not discard, spend, so you just flip it over to the red side, one of your defense tokens and re-roll as many dice as you want. A great way to give you a second chance after a really terrible roll. He's particularly useful for ships that have more defense tokens, like the Imperial Star Destroyer, which has 4, and you probably know you're not going to use a contain or not going to need both of your redirects, so you get to go ahead and really put in the max firepower of that damage. However, at 26 points, the full 10 point less Admiral SCREED allows you to spend 1 dice to change 1 dice to a face with a critical icon. Of course, SCREED is best for ships that have black dice, since that is a critical with a double hit. So that way, you just need to think of these 2 are dice manipulators that get you more damage when you are having a bad roll. SCREED is, if you're going to have black dice, go ahead and use SCREED. For everything else, you probably want to use Darth Vader, particularly with the Victory 2 Star Destroyers, because SCREED on those ships really wouldn't be all that useful because a blue dice is always going to be useful, and then you have to get rid of 2 of your reds just to get 1 critical. So use SCREED only when you have a majority of your ships with black dice. So if you have a Gladiator or a Raider, or if you're using the VSD-1 or the ISD-1, then maybe do that one. For everything else, stick with Vader. Admiral MOTTI is a very simple but still gets a lot of play Admiral. He increases the life of all your ships as long as he's alive. And at 24 points, he's a pretty good price. All the large ships, which are the Imperial Star Destroyers currently, gain 3 life, taking them from already impressive 11 to 14 damage, which is really daunting to take down. Medium ships like the Victory Star Destroyer get 2, and small ships like the Raider only get 1. So obviously, if you're going to use MOTTI, try to stick with as many medium or large ships as you can and make them much tougher to destroy. However, try to keep MOTTI alive, because once he's dead, all the other ships lose that ability, and if they've already taken that amount of damage, then they automatically explode as well. So you could actually lose more than 1 ship at a time once MOTTI's gone. The last admiral is Ozzel, and at a low price of 20 points, he gets, whenever a ship resolves a navigate token, it can change its speed by an additional 1. I think this is by far the weakest admiral, and I really don't expect him to get played all that often. If he was in the Rebel fleet, I bet he would get a lot more play, because jumping from 1 to 3 is way more important to the Rebels. But for the Imperials, really don't see him getting that much use. So let's go over the Imperial ships, starting with the massive and daunting Imperial Star Destroyer. There's two variants of the ship. There's the Imperial 1 and the Imperial 2. Both are relatively different from each other and similar in other ways. They both have 4 defense tokens, 2 redirects, a new contain, and a brace. However, the Imperial 2 allows a defense slot and 1 offensive slot, while the Victory 1 has 2 offensive slots. That defensive slot is very important if you want to have electronic countermeasures, which is very important and seems to be worth the 10-point difference between Imperial 1 and Imperial 2. I would highly recommend sticking with the Imperial 2 and putting a electronic countermeasure so you know you'll always be able to use that brace. If you do have the Imperial 1, it substitutes some of its red and blue dice for black dice. However, even at speed 3, there's not going to be that many ships that are going to stay at close range from you. Being able to reach out at medium and long range, in my opinion, is much more valuable, and I really like the Imperial 2 for that reason as well. For every build except for a dedicated carrier, I highly recommend you choose gunnery teams so you get to utilize that front arc twice. The title cards for the Imperial Star Destroyer are particularly useful, with the Relentless and Avenger getting the most use. The Relentless is only 3 points, and you get to reduce your command dials to 2 instead of 3. But you still get to use 3 command tokens if you want. So at 3 points, this is a great option that makes them as flexible as a Nebulon B, but the most powerful ship in the game. The next title card for the Imperial Star Destroyer is the Avenger, which, while attacking, the defender cannot spend exhausted defense tokens. This, at only 5 points, is particularly useful, but you would have to use this in conjunction with other ships to do the hit first, make them use that brace, and then go ahead and do the knockout punch. So, only do this if you have a good number of ships that will be able to attack your target first. The last one at 10 points, and I see being used the least, is Devastator. Once per round, while attacking from your front hull zone, you may add 1 blue dice for your attack pool for each discarded defense token. I would only see this being useful once all your shields are down and you're just battling it out, and then you go ahead and get rid of those 2 defense tokens so you can go ahead and give yourself 2 more blue dice. However, you don't want your shields to be down for Imperial Star Destroyer, and at 10 points, you can do a lot of other things with those points rather than sabotage yourself and take away your defense tokens. So I really don't see this being used all that often. The Imperial Star Destroyer is fast and surprisingly agile up to speed 3 with the same maneuvering setup as the Rebel Assault Frigate. It has a devastating front arc that with gunnery teams you'll be able to fire at 2 different ships. The Imperial Star Destroyer from now on will most likely make the bulk of the Imperial fleet. Why would you ever bother with a Victory when you have the Imperial Star Destroyer? However, it still has a vulnerable rear and can only fire, it has its lowest firing solution from that point. So it's still vulnerable at that point. But you can jump up to speed 3 and get those ships out of your way. The Imperial Raider is the next Wave 2 ship for the Imperial list. It's a very unique Imperial ship and gives them a completely different tool set than they had before. It's essentially a close-range corvette that specializes against squadrons. The title cards of Impetuous and Instigator both enhance its anti-squadron's abilities. One allowing you to do an additional attack from one of your hull zones even if you have already fired against one squadron, or Instigator having it actually engage squadrons that are at distance one of you as if they're engaged by two squadrons, which essentially counteracts the grit ability of some of the other heroes. They're both 4 points, and I can see them getting used, and they make them particularly beneficial against squadrons. However, these ships are incredibly fragile, and in the world with the Akbar side arcs, they could easily be taken out in 1 or 2 hits. So these ships should be kept closer to their Star Destroyers and use them as support ships rather than attack ships. They're not as durable as the MC-30 assault frigates, and they shouldn't be treated as such. Both versions of the Raider are particularly useful, and I really don't see one being far superior than the other. The Raider 1 and the Raider 2 are very similar, but just trade off a blue and a black dice in certain situations. They both have an engineering value of only 2, so you're only going to be able to recharge 1 shield at a time. The next Imperial ship is the one from Wave 1, the Gladiator. It was the Imperial star of Wave 1, and is definitely getting less play now that Wave 2 is hit. At 5 hull points, those Akbar enhanced broadsides can really take it out. I myself, in the last game that I uploaded, was able to take it out with an assault frigate shot and then an MC-80 side hit, and that was it. It was done. However, if you place it at the flank of your Imperial Star Destroyer, you can use it to soften up a target or have it deliver the killing blow after the Imperial Star Destroyer is already gone. One of the best title cards in the game, in my opinion, is the Demolisher. The Demolisher allows the ship to perform 1 attack, move, and then perform its second attack. With a possible speed 3 and essentially a speed 4 with the engine tech ability, you can really leapfrog from out of range to close range and unleash a devastating attack. For this reason, if you ever have a Gladiator, I would highly recommend you include the Demolisher title. The Assault Proton Torpedoes or Assault Concussion Missiles are both a good pairing on the Gladiator as well, in addition to Ordnance Experts, which allow you to re-roll as many black dice as you want. However, if you already have a dice modifying Admiral like SCREED or Vader, I wouldn't recommend doing this because you'll essentially be doubling up on a very similar ability. The Victory Star Destroyer. The poor old girl is losing most of its market share to the bigger, badder, tougher, faster Imperial Star Destroyer. The Victory Star Destroyer is still a good carrier, and his moderately priced Corruptor title upgrade allows you to get your bombers even faster to target. With upgrades like Admiral Chinahu on board allows you to do this even if they're engaged. Dominator has its uses, but stripping your own shields away for 12 points doesn't seem to be worthwhile to me. Instead, you should be using those points towards getting an Imperial Star Destroyer, and you get the more dice that way. Warlord is also helpful, but if you have an Admiral that already modifies dice like Vader and Screed, you wouldn't want to do this. If you are going to have a Victory Star Destroyer, the Victory 1 actually seems to be a pretty good option that focuses on long range and then having it be at the flanks of your Imperial Star Destroyer, so when they try to go around it, they get hit by your Victory. For the Imperial officers, I am yet to see Director Isard being used in any game I've played. Even at 3 points, knowing the command dials of your enemy really doesn't seem to matter, and a good admiral would be able to predict their opponent's next move anyway. Captain NEEDA is at a very reasonable 2 cost, and he allows you to swap out one of your defense tokens with an evade. I've seen him been used on Imperial Star Destroyers and swap out a contain or a redirect in order to get an evade. However, you may want those tokens eventually, and if you're planning on getting in up and close and trying to finish them off, the evade's only going to be able to help you at long ranges. The previously mentioned Admiral Chincherahu, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, allows you to, when you activate squadrons, even if they're engaged, they can move, but they move at a 2. But again, if you pair that with a Corruptor, they'll be moving at a 3. Wolof Yulgarian ability to retain a token that you just used is very useful. And in that way, you could forever recycle an engineering token to give you an additional shield, or activate an additional squadron, or change speeds at will. He's a very useful card, and very similar to the Antilles, except that it has to be a token that you already have, rather than getting a token that replicates your current command. At 7 points, I highly recommend you put them on your flagship and utilize them that way. The last one is Admiral Materarat. While defending against a ship, if your ship is at speed 3 or higher, this attack is treated as obstructed. However, if you execute maneuver and you overlap a ship, discard this card. So I guess he gets killed by his superiors. At 5 points, this is relatively affordable, and maybe you would want to put this on a Raider or a Gladiator, or maybe even a Star Destroyer if you think you're going to keep it at speed 3, but it's not all that particularly useful. Lastly, let's go over the Imperial fighters. IG-88 is a straight-up assassin that ignores escort and counter, and has a speed of 5 and 4 blue dice that can dish out a heavy beating against those that your enemy wants protected. He's a great way to kill the intel providing heroes, or to kill a Imperial mirror match Reimer. With counter 2 and a scattered defense token, he should be able to dish out damage as well as take some of his own before going down. The base aggressor is essentially a rogue Imperial X-Wing, and I can see it getting used on its own as well. Slave 1 is a vastly expensive squadron, but is one of the most versatile fighters out there. With rogue and bomber, with a blue and black dice, it makes it deadly against other ships. And with 4 attack squadrons, it also makes it very damaging against other squadrons. However, whenever you activate, you get to choose one enemy ship or one enemy squadron at distance 1, and they just suffer damage. And this is something that they don't get to counter as well, or use a token for it. They just take damage. It's not a regular attack. The Fire Spray 31 also has rogue and bomber, and with 2 blue dice could be really devastating against ships still. And at 18 points is relatively expensive, but I've seen plenty of Reimer fireballs utilizing this ship. Bosk is a brawler, and with 4 black dice, he's going to be able to do some serious damage. In addition, whenever he takes at least 1 damage, he gets an automatic accuracy. With Rogue and Grit, this hero is versatile even at the base version, being able to take on both ships and squadrons quite effectively. And at a life of 7, he's really going to be able to take a good amount of hit. Dengar is an unexpected gem of Wave 2. Intel is great synergy with Reimer, and whatever other battle group he flies with. Reimer, which we've talked about before, allows your squadrons to attack at medium to close range. They're only vulnerable of being locked down and engaged by enemy fighters. However, with Intel, this negates that, and your bombers will still be able to put dice on target even if they're locked down. Not only that, but he has a brace and a scatter to keep him alive. And all other squadrons at distance 1 or 2 have a counter 1 added to their power. If you pair him with a TIE Advance, which has escort, you'll be able to keep him alive and have them doing extra damage back to their enemies. And even the base version at 12 points still has intel and is pretty useful on its own as a support vessel. Fighting on its own, not so much. The Imperial star of Wave 1 for squadrons was Major Raymer. His tech's ability to allow all nearby friendly squadrons to fire medium close range is incredibly powerful and still is. It's so popular to be used his own name of Raymer Ball and now the Fireball, which is him paired with fire sprays. People know the danger of Raymer Ball, and every fleet now has some squadrons, mostly because of him. Any wise rebel will throw whatever they have to kill Raymer, or at least lock him up. To avoid being locked down, as mentioned before, use Dengar to have the intel, as well as giving him a counter. To avoid being killed, I would highly recommend including 1 or 2 TIE Advance, or maybe even Darth Vader himself, and using their escort ability. Any Imperial carrier build should include Raymer, and try to include at least 1 TIE Advance with him, as well as TIE Bombers. TIE Advance also get 1 black dice to use against ships, and that will be pretty good as well. The previously mentioned TIE Advance is the only Imperial squadron with escort text. This TIE Advance are tough and fast. They have the same offense as A-Wing. Vader is much more expensive version of the squadron and is incredibly devastating with 3 blues and a black dice and have all their criticals hits. Arguably is the heaviest hitter the Imperials have against squadrons. Keep in mind that you can't have both him as a squadron and as an admiral. As powerful as he is, 21 points is quite a lot, and you don't see him very often because of it. Next is the TIE Interceptor, which is more expensive than the TIE Fighter, but it's faster, more powerful attack, and has a counter too. For only 3 points more, these improvements are well worth it. It retains Swarm, and like its cheaper older brother, it works best in groups. Sunterfell is a hero version of the squadron, and for 18 points, includes a brace and a scatter token. His text ability allows any squadron to suffer 1 damage if they attack a squadron other than himself. Which is odd because at 3 hull points, I doubt you would want him to suffer the damage. It is essentially a form of optional escort. If your enemies are focused on Raymer, it could be useful. The last and good old classic TIE Fighter. At 8 points, it's cheap, and with Swarm ability, it's best to fly in groups. 1v1, it's always going to lose against any Rebel fighter. However, 3 versus 2, it could go in the TIE Fighter's favor. The TIEs have 2 hero units. Howlrunner, which buffs her fellow Imperial squadrons that have Swarm. Instead of re-rolling a dice, it actually gets to add a dice as well as re-rolling them. The power doesn't affect her though. At 16 points, she's a great addition, and you should have her augment fleets that use a lot of Swarm squadrons. She has a brace and scatter token, same as the second hero, Maul or Mitchell, whose text ability causes enemies to suffer 1 damage whenever he moves. To be able to move while engaged, he should be surrounded by heavy ships or have a ship providing intel. Now that Dengar provides intel, Maul's 16 points could be a great combo to cause massive damage to surviving ships that are going after your Raymer Ball. Or you can go after Jan Ors, and with only 4 movements, even without any attacks, you could kill her that way. So this is the end of my tips, tricks, and battle strategies for the Empire. I hope this helps all of you. If there are any other combos or particularly useful tips that I haven't mentioned today, please include them in the comments below, and thank you very much. Bye.